Hello, and thanks everyone for joining us again for our pre-concert video for Holland Symphony's October 28 concert featuring Brahms' Third Symphony, Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto, and a brand new piece by John Weinglass called Alone Together, which is an artistic response to the pandemic and many issues that our country and musicians faced in the pandemic. So Johannes is more familiar with this piece. I had never heard of it. What do we need to know about this piece, Johannes?
Yeah, so John Weinglass, this is a pretty influential piece that sort of is done in the California circles, but now it's receiving a little bit more performances across the country. So it's for smaller instrumentation. The piece is basically just for percussion, harp, and strings. And it was sort of the Zoom brainchild collaboration between John Weinglass and a couple conductors here in California, Barbara Dave Turner from the San Jose Chamber Orchestra and Ray Hatodo from the Fresno Philharmonic. They talked to Weinglass about this, but it was ultimately co-commissioned with yet two more orchestras joining, the Monterey Symphony and then Carl Sinclair and the Pacific Symphony here in Orange County. And so it all sort of came together expressing a shared interest in new music that responds to basically what was going on in 2020 with the pandemic and the catastrophic circumstances, of this global crisis. So there's a joint statement that, the Fresno Philharmonic conductor and the Weinglass came out together, and they basically said Alone Together addresses the social issues we are facing during this pandemic from not being able to perform together, right? Even we, this is a side note, even we in Holland Symphony, we struggled with this, right? So we did 2 recordings during the pandemic, but it was very hard for us to cancel concerts and sort of envision what we're going to do in the meantime. And the statement follows, also, living through systemic racial disparities while the shelter in place happened during the pandemic was very hard. But despite all the setbacks of our present limitations, we are moving forward, said the note. This work is allowing us to continue our work as performers, to never lose sight of just how important the arts are and have always been. So by creating this work, we are providing a way to connect to one another, which is so valuable and something most of us probably once took for granted. We may feel alone at this moment, but we are 4 performing arts organizations who are coming together and move forward together as one. So the work was virtually premiered in Costa Mesa, the home of the Pacific Symphony, and Carl Sinclair led the performance. So the score calls basically for strings and then bass drum, cymbals, glockenspiel, vibraphone, chimes, tam-tam, and harp. So it's very sort of expressive and makes you think of different timbres, and all of that came across pretty well in the online performances. About John Weinglass, because he's not yet known very much. Born in '73, this is just a year older than me. He started playing viola and composing little pieces when he was 6 years old, and soon joined the DC Youth Orchestra program in his native Washington. He earned an undergraduate degree in composition and viola from the American University in DC, and a Master's of Arts with an emphasis on composing for film, television, and multimedia. He has written scores for shows and documentaries on MSNBC, CNN, NBC, CBS, and ABC, scored several independent films, and written commercials for the United States Army, Red Cross, Texaco, and fulfilled commissions from the National Endowment of the Arts, among others. So I'm very happy that this piece is performed more. I really look forward of doing this, on a concert where we have more traditional music, the Mendelssohn and the Brahms. So this is just kind of a nice reflection of, what happened just 3 years ago and how we've came out of it stronger and with a renewed sense of appreciation for, making live music and sharing that with our audience.
Don't forget the daytime Emmys he won for All My Children.
Oh, that is true. Yes.
Yes, I think three of them. No, listening to a rough recording of this piece. There is no recording of this piece. We have an interview with Wineglass linked on the website under the program notes tab. If you're interested in hearing snippets, that instrumentation you read all the instruments, but interestingly and probably not coincidentally, all those instruments are things that can be played while wearing a mask. Since it
Hmm.
was written back in 2021 when we were all still masking. Um, it starts off very sparse and it's sort of hard to define with a lot of instruments playing alone. And I thought it's really striking the way, looking at the parts, the way the music really comes together by the end of the first movement. There's a pretty dramatic spot. Um, where I don't know what instrument plays the sort of, I don't, is it a knocking theme or a heartbeat theme?
I think it's a heartbeat.
Okay, yeah, and it gets very loud. You can definitely hear the Hollywood influence at the end of the first movement. And then the second short movement turns very hopeful, but there's a there's a reaching quality, lots of notes that start off really quietly and grow into something really big. So I feel like there are all these moments where all these individuals are reaching out for something or someone. It's really lovely the way it all comes together. It's a really striking piece. So I'm excited to introduce it to everyone. After that, it'll be something totally different with a Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. Mendelssohn wrote his concerto in 1844. To give that a little context, the Emperor Concerto, which we played in September, was written in 1809. So not too long after that, but a fairly big step musically. Um, Up to this point, concertos had followed a pretty standard format, like a lot of the Mozart and Haydn concertos, and even many of the Beethoven concertos, though not the last couple, would begin with a very long orchestral statement of the main themes. Then the soloist would repeat that material, and would be off in our very standard classical forms. Mendelssohn, who played some violin, played some piano, developed a strong friendship with a violinist named Ferdinand David, who ended up being the concertmaster of Mendelssohn's orchestra. They played a lot of chamber music together. They hatched an idea to have Mendelssohn write a concerto for David. And they both felt strongly that it be a very substantive musical work, not just a place, a showcase for the soloist to show all of David's tricks and virtuosic abilities, though he certainly had many of those. So it would be very different from some of the perhaps more Italian, very Paganini style show off concertos. And Mendelssohn really did something quite new. He brought it's a very much a romantic concerto. So he changed the form, even though big picture it adheres to a pretty classical sonata form and familiar forms. He started right off with a soloist playing the melody. It's a very lyrical melody, sort of a song without words. It's really well written for the violin in the timbre and different colors of the violin, melodies that can be played all on one string. So it has consistent colors within certain phrases. Um, One of the really noteworthy things he did is that he didn't want to leave the cadenza up to the soloist. So typically the cadenza, though, usually the biggest cadenza is in the first movement. So they, get to the very end of the first movement, then the soloist is given a chance to theoretically improvise and show off a cadenza based on themes from the music. Probably a lot of times they had it written ahead of time, but definitely a showcase for that soloist's abilities. And Mendelssohn wanted to write his own cadenza and really use the cadenza as a transition from the development section back to the return of the main material. And so he did that. I think what we've wound up with is a cadenza that's more by David than Mendelssohn. But that was sort of formally groundbreaking to put the cadenza there and to use that, number one, to hand it to to the soloist and say, you know, you must perform this, but then also to use that as a bridge to within the movement rather than at the end of the movement. All the movements are to be played continuously without a stop. That was somewhat new. But really, Mendelssohn took the concerto as a form and brought it to a new level in terms of its romantic lyricism and just wonderful melodies. Really formally took it a big step from the very traditional classical concertos of Mozart and Haydn and early Beethoven. If you heard our Beethoven Emperor Concerto last month, you heard Beethoven experimenting with some new ground, and then Mendelssohn kind of looked at what Beethoven did and took it some additional steps. It's really considered to be one of the best violin concertos ever written. It's really well suited for the violin, as I said. The first movement is very lyrical, deceptively difficult, sounds fairly simple. I have a lot of students who come to me and say, I want to play the Mendelssohn Concerto. It's not that hard. And they really don't realize how hard it is to do well. The second movement is in a beautiful, very, very almost simple sounding C major, an andante, very lyrical, gets a little stormier in the middle. And the third movement, Mendelssohn does incorporate some violin virtuosic techniques and a little bit of a very appropriate, tasteful violin fireworks. Very tricky to play, fast. Mendelssohn is known and among instrumentalists sort of feared for his scherzos. So very light, very delicate, very fast music. It's very hard to play well, and the third movement definitely falls into that category. It's a lot of fun to play, but very tricky to play. We have performed this piece before, not for several years, but Aaron Borofsky, who teaches at University of Michigan, is just a beautiful, beautiful player. He's played with us before, so he's not played Mendelssohn with us before. What did he play Tchaikovsky with us last time, several years ago?
I think it was about 10 or almost 11 years ago that we've done Tchaikovsky with him.
And he also, even before your time, Johannes, did Brooks Scottish Fantasy with us. So I think this is his third appearance with us. So we're really grateful that he's willing to play with us again and that we get to collaborate with him. He's just a marvelous performer.
I've two things maybe I can add. First of all, I have a quote here by David, who said to Mendelssohn, this is going to be something great. There's plenty of music for violin and orchestra, but there has only been one truly great concerto, and he meant Beethoven.
Yeah.
And now there will be two. To which Mendelssohn replied, I'm not competing with Beethoven, right? So this is what ties the Mendelssohn and Brahms together, that there is this giant that is looming over these composers, right? So Mendelssohn was very fearful that he is not going to measure up to Beethoven and that his concerto is just not going to be as great as the one by Beethoven, but it turned out completely differently. And, he kept innovating. And same with Brahms, who took forever to write his first symphony because he was so afraid that he's not going to measure up in the timeline of history, that he will be disregarded as somebody who could not measure up to Beethoven.
Yeah, that whole generation of composers felt Beethoven's shadow just looming so large. Yeah, Brahms waited until he was 40 to write his first symphony. He had written some serenades and some smaller pieces. He did a couple of piano concertos, some of the shorter, like the variations on a theme by Haydn. The third symphony. Now this is we've performed. We started with the second, and we did the first. Last spring we did the fourth. Now this October we'll do the third symphony. Many musical scholars feel that this symphony is Brahms's best symphony, and yet it's not performed very often. Why is that?
So to me, it's like when I was going through music school, we all study, Brahms symphonies also. You're always warned by your teachers that this is the hardest. It's the shortest, right? And he also composed it in only 4 months. So it sort of came to him and it's sort of conceived you know, in sort of this, I guess, mood of inspiration. It's incredibly mature. It's hard rhythmically, and for younger orchestras, this is one of the hardest stylistically to get. So this is the right order, right? You should do 2 first, and then, you know, 1 and 4, and then you might be ready for 3. So you just need a certain maturity and ease. It cannot sound labor intensive. That does not do the style, right? The key of F major sort of invokes a more pastoral feeling, so it can't sound like this is hard, right? It has to be played with an orchestra that has some maturity.
I thought maybe it wasn't played as often because it ends very quietly.
That is true, and more introspectively.
We
Yeah,
do.
but it's you know, for Brahms, when a conductor conducts, usually the downbeats are the strongest, right? And in Brahms, it's very often the upbeats. So half of the time when you're conducting like a first movement, you're sort of turned around, where the strong beats tend to be the upbeats, right? So it's kind of awkward. Uh, so it does take some skill, not only by orchestra but also by the conductor. So I think many people shy away a little bit more.
I've read about the ambiguity that permeates the symphony. So there's some tonal ambiguity. It's he writes that this piece is in F major, and indeed it ends in F major. And it ostensibly begins in F major, but the first, you know, you have a chord, you have an F chord, and then the next chord is focused on an A flat, which would suggest F minor. So you have these even right from the first 2 measures, this ambiguity, and you know, is this movement in major? Is it in minor? But you get these 2 big introductory chords as if some big inhalation, and then the melody proceeds. It's a heroic melody in the first movement, although largely in a minor key. So there's this sort of tragic hero. Um, the first movement is pretty stormy, although then the second theme is quite pastoral and quiet and gentle. There's a lot of really wonderful woodwind playing in this piece. The second movement is in C major, very gentle. There's basically just one theme, one tune. It's introduced by woodwinds. It's very chorale, like almost like a gentle organ tune, with strings adding a lot of little decoration. The third movement, perhaps, is my favorite. Starts with this. This is an F minor, so back to the minor. Starts with this gorgeous melody in the cello part. Again, feels a little bit like reaching and not quite holding on to anything, and then finally the tune begins to unfold and really spin along. The fourth movement is quite stormy. It begins quietly, but then gets quite turbulent. F minor, again, a lot of it, although he goes into a lot of different keys here and there. It's one of these pieces where we have to keep an eye on the key signature because it keeps changing. And then, as I said, does end in that quiet F major, very peaceful. So we've had 2 concerts in a row where we will leave the audience with a very quiet, reflective ending.
Brahms was a good friend of both Schumanns, right? Robert Schumann, who early introduced Brahms to the world as in his function as editor of the Neue Zeitung für Musik, the new journal of music. He hailed Brahms like this wonderful person who is going to be the next great deal, mainly based on his piano music. But then later, when Robert married Clara, Brahms has a friendship, you know, kept a good friendship with both of them. And then especially Clara, musically, they were very much aligned. So he kept on sending her his compositions. And Clara read through this, you know, just on the piano. And she mentioned, here's, and I'm quoting, all the movements seem to be of one piece, one beat of the heart, each one a jewel. From start to finish, one is wrapped about with the mysterious charms of the woods and forests. I could not tell you which movement I loved the most. And it's true that material from movements reappear in other movements. And this is very forward looking, right? This is what Liszt later took to the next extreme with sort of through composed works where thematic material is changed into movements, interlocking those movements. So it's quite progressive in that way. But the softer, more introspective finish of the symphony sort of reminds me of like a sort of self-reflection of somebody who has, lived a mature life and is looking back. It's probably not something a 20-year-old does, right? Because those people look forward, but Brahms just turned 50 when he wrote the symphonies. So I'm almost turning 50. So you start reflecting a little bit of, what have I done with my life? And there's a certain maturity. There's a certain maturity where you look back and some of your heroic ambitions from years past maybe you see in a different light and you see how it all hangs together. So it's just wonderfully almost a little autobiographical, I would say.
And I guess my take on that would be there's a longing quality to a lot of Brahms's music, and maybe especially in this symphony, in different ways. Each movement expresses some sense of longing, and I think a lot of the biographical information we have about Brahms, he was a curious person who lived a solitary life. Maybe knew some of that longing. You mentioned Clara Schumann. Certainly had unrequited romantic interests. He was a person who was very private, but knew intense longing, but also didn't want anyone to know about it. He destroyed a lot of the journals and notes and correspondence he had with people. But we
Also his compositions, I think aren't there only 3 or 4 string quartets, but I think maybe 3, and but there is evidence that he composed over 20, maybe even 30 string quartets, but to his mind they just didn't measure up, so this all got burnt. It's very different from Beethoven, where we have sketches surviving, and you saw how he was going through his music and improving and changing things. We don't really have that for Brahms. All that survives are sort of masterful works. We don't know that much about his process.
He was extremely hard on himself, extremely self-critical. Yeah, he didn't publish his first string quartet until he was at least 40 either, sort of approximately the same time as the First Symphony. But it's a marvelous piece. I have played it once before a long time ago, so it's been really wonderful to rediscover this again. Not easy for strings, not easy for winds, but I'm excited to present this to our friends in our Holland Symphony audience as well.
It's a shorter concert all around. I think last concert we had sort of 42 to 45 minutes on each half. I think the symphony, 30 minutes on the second half, and then the first half is only, this 35 maybe. So
40.
40. Overall, not quite as lengthy.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, again, everyone, thanks for watching. If you're still with us, we look forward to seeing you on October 28th, and we hope you enjoy the concert.